Chapter 1, The Billionaire's Obsession. Victor Hale was not a man accustomed to wanting. When he desired a company, he bought it. When he fancied a property, he signed a check. When he needed loyalty, he purchased it with influence and power. For 40 years, his name had been stitched into the fabric of finance and industry, commanding respect and fear alike. His penthouse stretched above the skyline of New York like a crown, his estates dotted the coasts of Europe, and his face often appeared in glossy magazines with the title The Relentless King. But for all the wealth and reputation surrounding him, Victor Hale carried within his chest a quiet hunger that no acquisition could satisfy. It had begun months ago, on a night meant to celebrate his success. The gala had been grander than most, a swirl of diamonds and tuxedos under chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars. Men in sharp suits toasted to deals struck across continents, while women in satin gowns floated from one circle of conversation to another. Victor, as always, stood at the center, receiving handshakes, offering thin smiles, playing the role expected of him, the unshakable titan of industry. Yet as the hours dragged on, the hollow truth pressed upon him: he was tired. Success had become a routine, applause an echo he could no longer feel. In a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the eyes of the elite, he had let the mask slip for just a moment. That was when she appeared. He never caught her name. But he remembered the moment vividly, a gentle voice asking if he was all right, a pair of soft eyes that looked not at the billionaire, but at the man behind the mask. She handed him a glass of water, nothing more, yet her small act of kindness cut deeper than any business deal or hollow compliment that evening. Her presence was fleeting, he was called away, distracted by obligations, and when he turned back, she was gone. But the eyes remained. They haunted him in quiet hours. At board meetings, he would drift into thought, recalling the tenderness in her gaze. In the stillness of night, when the city below roared with life, he would stare out from his penthouse windows and wonder who she was. She was not like the women who usually circled his world, painted with ambition and greed. There had been honesty in her face, a purity untainted by the hunger for wealth or fame. Victor Hale was a man who could not tolerate mysteries. He had built an empire by uncovering truths, anticipating weaknesses, and bending circumstances to his will. Yet here he was, restless, unsettled, unable to command his own heart into silence. So the search began. At first, he attempted subtlety. Discreet inquiries to the gala's organizers, a few conversations with trusted contacts. But no one seemed to know who she was. The guest lists offered nothing. Photographs from the event showed faces he recognized, but never hers. It was as if she had slipped through the cracks of his carefully ordered world. Frustration gave way to obsession. Victor employed private investigators, each more expensive than the last, handing them vague descriptions: dark hair, gentle eyes, a smile that seemed to carry warmth into a room. Find her, he demanded, whatever it takes. Advertisements were placed under false names, coded messages spread through discreet networks. He even funded charitable events across the city in hopes she might appear again, drawn by the same cause that had brought her to the gala. The cost mounted quickly, millions poured into the search without hesitation. For Victor, money had always been a tool, but never before had it been spent on something so intangible. Shareholders questioned his distractions, newspapers speculated about his unusual silence in business affairs, but Victor brushed it all aside. None of it mattered. What mattered were the eyes that lingered in his memory, promising something his billions could never buy. His staff began to notice the change in him. The once unshakable man now wandered his halls at night, restless, as though haunted by a ghost. The sharpness in his commands softened, his temper cooled, replaced by a simmering impatience not directed at them, but at himself. They whispered about it in kitchens and corridors. Their master, the invincible billionaire, seemed human. Victor himself could not explain the depth of his longing. He told himself it was curiosity, that he merely wanted to solve the puzzle of her identity. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. For a fleeting moment, that mysterious woman had seen him, not as Victor Hale the billionaire, but as Victor, the weary man behind the empire. And that recognition had shaken him in a way power never had. Each night he returned to the memory, replaying it like a film. The soft tilt of her head, the quiet strength in her gaze, the way her presence seemed to ease the weight on his shoulders. It had been years since anyone had looked at him without expectation, without calculation. He craved that simplicity, that sincerity. And so, Victor Hale, the man who once declared that every problem had a price, threw himself into a search that defied reason. $35 million slipped from his accounts in less than half a year, funding investigators, informants, and global searches. He followed rumors across countries, chasing shadows in Paris, London, and Dubai, only to return empty-handed each time. But giving up was not in his nature. He told himself she was out there, waiting to be found, perhaps unaware of the fortune and influence he was ready to place at her feet. He would not rest until he had those eyes before him again. What Victor Hale did not know, what would make his heart shatter with shame when the truth finally came, was that the woman he searched for across continents had never left his side. She was there, every day, moving silently through his mansion, unseen by the man who thought he saw everything. And as he poured millions into the winds of obsession, Rosa, his maid, carried on with her quiet duties, never imagining she was the center of a billionaire's desperate quest. Chapter 2, A Priceless Search. Victor Hale had always believed that money could bend the world into the shape he desired. A contract here, a bribe there, a well-placed investment, and doors that were locked to others would swing open before him. It was how he had conquered business, how he had built his empire, and how he had maintained his throne in the ruthless kingdom of finance. So when the face of a woman haunted his mind, he applied the same philosophy: find her, no matter the cost. The first step was discreet. Victor summoned James Carrington, his chief of security, to the penthouse office. James was an ex-military man with a scar running down his jawline and a reputation for efficiency. He had retrieved stolen prototypes, silenced scandals, and protected Victor's secrets for years. If anyone could track down a mystery woman, it was him. "I don't care how," Victor said, sliding a photo across the desk. It was a blurred shot from the charity gala, a wide view of the ballroom. In one corner, barely visible, was the outline of a woman in a plain black dress, her head turned as though avoiding the camera. Find her. James studied the image, his brow furrowed. That's not much to work with. Then make it enough, Victor snapped, his impatience flaring. She was there that night. She exists. I want a name, a history, everything. Spare no expense. And with that, the hunt began. Private investigators were brought in, some local, others from overseas with reputations for finding the unfindable. They combed through guest lists, questioned catering staff, traced deliveries to the hotel, and scrutinized hours of security footage. The footage showed her only once, a fleeting shadow near the service doors, slipping past the edges of the glittering party. Then nothing. Weeks passed, and reports piled up on Victor's desk. They were filled with details of women who vaguely fit the description, each promising lead ending in disappointment. One investigator claimed to have found her in Paris, another in Los Angeles, but every time Victor followed the trail, it turned to dust. His irritation grew. He was not a man accustomed to failure. But his frustration only deepened his determination. If she's not in the records, Victor told himself one sleepless night, then she's hiding. And if she's hiding, there's a reason. The thought drove him further, pushing him to spend more, demand more, push harder. Soon, the search bled beyond New York. Victor's resources extended across continents, and he unleashed them all. His jets carried investigators to Dubai, Milan, Rio de Janeiro, and Tokyo. Agencies that once specialized in corporate espionage now found themselves chasing rumors of a woman with dark hair and gentle eyes. Victor even placed coded advertisements in newspapers and online platforms, hoping she would somehow see them and step forward. The cost was staggering. $35 million slipped through his accounts in a blur of contracts, bribes, and false trails. But to Victor, the money was meaningless. Wealth had lost its luster, this pursuit was the only thing that gave his life color. Still, the world whispered. Journalists speculated on why the billionaire had withdrawn from the spotlight. Shareholders muttered about his distraction, warning that an empire built on precision could not afford the luxury of obsession. Rivals spread rumors of a scandal, whispering that Victor Hale was hiding a mistress or covering up a secret child. None of it was true, but none of it mattered to him. His mind was consumed by the woman whose eyes had pierced through the armor of his existence. At night, alone in his vast penthouse, Victor would return to that single moment at the gala. He could still hear her voice, "Are you all right, sir?" A simple question, but one no one else had ever asked without motive. That small kindness had cut through the noise of 1,000 insincere compliments. It had been real, untainted, and he was starving for it. The staff in his mansion began to notice the changes. Victor was no longer the sharp, unbending figure who once ruled over them with cold authority. He was distracted, softer at times, impatient at others. Rosa, the maid, passed him daily in the hallways, unnoticed as always, but she saw the difference. She saw the way he wandered his home at midnight, staring into corners as though chasing a memory. She saw the piles of files and photographs left on his desk, the endless phone calls, the frustration in his voice when yet another lead collapsed. In the kitchens and servant quarters, whispers spread. "What's wrong with him?" one cook asked. "He's lost," replied another. "He's chasing something he can't find." Some thought he was ill, others that he was facing ruin. But only Victor knew the truth, that he was searching for the one thing his billions could not buy, the presence of a woman who had looked at him like a man, not a machine of wealth. And so the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Every new lead was another rise of hope followed by the crushing weight of disappointment. But still, Victor refused to stop. "I will find her," he told himself again and again, his voice a vow spoken into the emptiness of his penthouse. "I will not rest until she stands before me." What Victor could not know, what none of his investigators could guess, was that his search was not a chase across continents but a circle that always returned to him. The woman he sought was not hiding in Paris or Dubai. She was not on the guest lists of foreign galas or tucked away in a forgotten record. She was in his home. She was in his world every day, silent and unseen. And while Victor Hale spent millions chasing shadows, Rosa quietly dusted his study, served his meals, and passed him in the hallways with her eyes lowered. She carried the memory of that gala too, but unlike him, she had no illusions. To her, it had been nothing more than a fleeting moment of kindness. To him, it had become an obsession worth a fortune. Chapter 3, The World at His Feet. Victor Hale had never been a man of half measures. Once he committed himself to a pursuit, he threw every ounce of his willpower, wealth, and resources into the effort. The search for the mysterious woman was no different. What had begun in New York quickly spread across the globe, transforming into an international hunt that stretched the limits of his vast empire. Private jets stood ready at his command. Investigators were stationed in every major city, armed with her description: dark hair, soft eyes, a presence that carried quiet warmth. Sketch artists drafted portraits based on his memory, refining them again and again, though Victor could never quite capture the essence of her face. The eyes, he insisted to them, make sure you capture her eyes. Paris was the first city on his list. He remembered the woman's elegance, the way her presence seemed to carry a natural grace. To him, it suggested Europe, perhaps a daughter of aristocracy, hidden away from public view. His investigators infiltrated Parisian society, slipping into high-profile galas, sifting through photographs of women whose beauty and background matched fragments of his memory. But each time Victor flew in to meet a supposed match, he was disappointed. Their laughter was practiced, their smiles sharpened by ambition. None of them possessed that elusive sincerity. From Paris, the trail led to London. There, he funded a charity auction, pouring millions into the event, convinced she might be drawn to another noble cause. He sat in the front row, scanning every face in the crowd, waiting for the moment when her eyes would meet his once more. But as the night dragged on and the final gavel fell, he left with nothing but frustration. Dubai followed, then Milan, then Rio de Janeiro. Each city carried its own rumors, its own whispered promises of a woman who might be her. One lead suggested she was a rising artist in Florence, another claimed she was a teacher in Buenos Aires. Victor followed each thread, no matter how thin, only to find himself staring into the wrong faces again and again. The cost of his obsession soared. Tens of millions bled from his accounts, funding events, bribing officials, hiring entire teams of operatives. Yet Victor paid without hesitation. He was a man who could purchase almost anything, and so the idea of something beyond his reach gnawed at him relentlessly. But with every failed lead, cracks began to form in his unshakable confidence. On the flight back from Rome, he sat alone in his private jet, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the table. For the first time, doubt whispered in his mind. What if she does not wish to be found? What if she was never meant to be more than a fleeting moment? The thought unsettled him deeply. Victor Hale was not accustomed to limits. The universe had always bent to his will. To accept otherwise felt like defeat. His staff noticed the toll. The once dominant titan of industry seemed thinner, more restless. He snapped less at mistakes, but his silences grew heavier, as though the weight of his obsession pressed on his chest. His board of directors grew uneasy, muttering about missed meetings and distracted decisions. Rivals smelled blood in the water, circling with anticipation. But Victor did not care. He found himself in hotel suites overlooking foreign skylines, staring out of windows with the same hollow gaze he carried at home. The world glittered at his feet, yet it felt emptier with every passing day. He began to understand, in ways he had never admitted before, that wealth could not fill the chasm within him. The more he searched, the more he realized what he was truly chasing was not merely a woman, but the feeling she had given him, of being seen, even for a brief moment, as something more than a billionaire. In quiet moments, his memory betrayed him. He replayed the charity gala again and again, searching for details he had overlooked. The sound of her voice, the curve of her smile, the way her presence seemed to cut through the clamor of the ballroom. Sometimes he wondered if his mind had exaggerated it, if perhaps he was chasing a ghost built of loneliness and imagination. Yet no, he remembered the weight of her kindness too vividly. It was real. It had to be real. Still, as the months passed, hope frayed at the edges. Each failed lead deepened the shadows beneath his eyes, each fruitless journey gnawed at his spirit. The world mocked him in silence. The billionaire who had everything was now reduced to chasing a phantom across continents. What Victor Hale could not know, what none of his investigators could uncover, was that the answer was never thousands of miles away. While he scoured Parisian ballrooms and Dubai penthouses, Rosa, the quiet maid he overlooked daily, moved silently through his mansion. She polished the silverware he never touched, dusted the shelves he never noticed, and carried the memory of that gala in her heart without expecting it to mean anything. She was there, in his world every day, unseen. And Victor, blinded by his pride and his conviction that greatness could only be found in distant places, searched the farthest reaches of the earth while overlooking the treasure standing quietly within his home. Chapter 4: The Woman in the Shadows. Rosa Alvarez had long ago accepted her place in the world. For years, she had moved quietly through the grand mansion of Victor Hale, polishing silver that gleamed brighter than her own future, dusting shelves lined with books she had no time to read, and scrubbing marble floors that reflected chandeliers she could never afford to touch. Her footsteps were light, her presence unnoticed, her work invisible, yet essential. In a house built on silence and order, Rosa had become a shadow. She was not ungrateful. The wages kept her younger brother in school and her mother's medicine on the table back home in Queens. Each paycheck meant survival, and survival was enough. She had seen others lose everything, and she would not allow that fate for her family. Yet at times, when she stood before the tall windows of the mansion, gazing out at the skyline of New York, a quiet longing stirred within her. Not for riches, she had never envied Victor Hale's fortune, but for recognition. To be seen, not just as a uniform or a servant, but as a person. Her employer, Victor himself, rarely looked at her. He was a presence more than a man, distant, commanding, always moving with purpose. When he passed her in the hallways, his gaze slipped past as if she were part of the furniture. Rosa did not resent him for it. The rich lived in a different world, and she had built armor around her heart to shield herself from the sting of invisibility. Still, sometimes she wondered what it might feel like to have him pause, even for a moment, and say her name. That night at the charity gala had been different. She had not attended as a guest, of course, but as part of the hotel staff, wearing the same plain black uniform as the others. Her job had been to manage trays of glasses and ensure the tables never emptied. The ballroom glittered with laughter and champagne, the air thick with perfume and politics. To Rosa, it was another night of quiet work, another stage where the rich performed their endless dance of power. And yet she remembered him. Victor Hale, standing in the corner, apart from the crowd. His face was set in the same hard lines she had seen so often in the mansion, but that night, she had caught something else, weariness. Beneath the polished exterior of the billionaire, she saw a man who looked strangely alone. On instinct, she had approached. "Are you all right, sir?" she had asked softly, offering him a glass of water. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, she thought he truly saw her. Not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as another human being. His expression softened, if only for a heartbeat. Then the moment passed. Someone called his name, and he turned away, swept back into the tide of admirers. Rosa returned to her duties, convincing herself it had meant nothing. But in the quiet corners of her memory, the moment lingered. Back in the mansion, life continued as always. Rosa rose before dawn, tied her hair back neatly, and slipped into her uniform. She moved through grand hallways in silence, her tools clinking softly against polished surfaces. She knew the schedule of the house better than anyone, which mornings Victor left early for meetings, which evenings he dined alone in the study, which nights he lingered on the balcony overlooking the city. Lately, she noticed changes in him. His footsteps echoed through the halls long after midnight. Piles of photographs and papers cluttered his desk, though she dared not study them closely. He seemed restless, distracted, his gaze often distant. Rosa wondered what troubled him, but she knew better than to ask. In her world, curiosity could cost a job, and she could not afford such a luxury. Still, she felt a strange empathy for him. Behind his cold exterior, she sensed a man burdened by something heavier than wealth. She had seen loneliness before, in her widowed mother's eyes, in her brother's silence after their father's passing. Victor carried the same quiet ache, though he wrapped it in steel and glass. Sometimes, when Rosa passed him in the corridor and he failed to notice her, she allowed herself a small, secret thought: what would he do if he knew it was me? If he realized the woman he's searching for is the one dusting his shelves and serving his meals? The thought both frightened and saddened her. He would never believe it. Men like Victor Hale did not look for women like Rosa Alvarez. And if he discovered the truth, would he feel gratitude? Or would he laugh at the absurdity that his priceless search ended with a maid? So Rosa kept her silence. She folded laundry with careful hands, polished the silver until it gleamed, and carried trays into his study with her eyes lowered. She was the keeper of a secret he did not know existed. But sometimes, when she caught him staring out of the window late at night, his reflection merging with the city lights, Rosa felt the faintest tug at her heart. She wondered if, beneath the billionaire's armor, there was a man longing for the same thing she did, to be seen, truly seen, for who he was. And though she dared not admit it even to herself, a part of her wished he might one day look up, meet her eyes, and finally recognize the woman he had been searching for all along. Until then, Rosa remained what she had always been. A shadow in the mansion of a man who believed he could buy everything, even love. Chapter 5, Unseen Kindness. The night of the gala had unfolded like so many others in Rosa's life: long hours of preparation, polished trays balanced on tired arms, and the endless flow of strangers who never once looked at her. The ballroom shimmered with light, every detail crafted to dazzle, crystal glasses clinking, orchestral music weaving through laughter, diamonds catching fire beneath the chandeliers. For Rosa, it was simply another shift. Her assignment was to circulate the floor, ensuring that guests never saw the bottom of their glasses. She slipped between gowns of silk and suits worth more than her entire year's wages, invisible except for the drinks she carried. She was used to being unseen, it was safer that way. But then she noticed him. Victor Hale stood apart from the crowd, tall and severe, his expression carved from stone. He was surrounded by admirers earlier, but now he lingered alone in a corner, his shoulders weighted as though the gala itself was a burden. Most people only saw power in him, Rosa saw fatigue. Something about the hollowness in his eyes stirred an instinct in her. Without hesitation, she crossed the room. She set her tray down and picked up a simple glass of water. No champagne, no fine wine, just water. When she approached, Victor looked up as if startled. Few dared interrupt him, especially not someone in uniform. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked softly. Her voice carried no agenda, no performance. Just genuine concern. He stared at her, momentarily disarmed. The sharp mask he wore faltered, and she glimpsed a man stripped of titles and fortune. He accepted the glass, their hands brushing briefly. His gaze lingered on hers, caught by the calm warmth there. For a moment, the noise of the gala seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in quiet recognition. Then the moment broke. Someone called his name across the hall, pulling him back into the glittering swirl of politics and wealth. He gave a slight nod of thanks and turned away, vanishing into the crowd once more. Rosa returned to her duties, heart steady but strangely light. She didn't expect him to remember her, not when he moved in circles where people like her were nothing but background. But she carried the memory with her, because in that instant, she had seen the man, not the billionaire. For Victor, however, that small exchange seared itself into his mind. Later that night, while applause thundered for his donation, he barely heard it. He kept recalling the woman who had offered him water without pretense, who had asked if he was all right when no one else had dared. Her kindness was so simple, so ordinary, and yet it unsettled him more than any grand gesture ever had. He replayed it afterward in fragments, her steady voice, the sincerity in her eyes, the way she neither fawned nor recoiled. She had treated him like a person. He could not even recall her face clearly, only the feeling of being seen. For Rosa, the gala ended as it always did, clearing tables long after the music died, slipping out into the cold night with aching feet. She boarded the bus home, her uniform faint with the scent of wine and smoke, her wages tucked carefully into her bag. She did not dwell on Victor Hale, her thoughts were with her family waiting back in their modest apartment. Yet somewhere deep inside, the memory lingered, a quiet reminder that kindness, however fleeting, carried its own weight. For Victor, it was different. He left the gala restless, haunted by what he could not name. He didn't know who she was or why her presence had cut through the emptiness of that evening. But the moment had lodged itself in him like a spark in dry wood, refusing to die. Neither of them realized that night that a single glass of water and a few words would set in motion a search across continents, a fortune spent, and a truth that would one day shatter them both. Chapter 6, The Discovery. The search had stretched Victor Hale to the edge of exhaustion. Months of travel, false leads, and wasted millions had left him with nothing but restless nights and a reputation for distraction. His investigators were growing cautious, careful with their reports, afraid of provoking his temper with yet another failure. Then one evening, James Carrington, the man Victor trusted most, arrived at the penthouse with a thin folder under his arm. "I may have something," James said quietly, setting it on the desk. Victor looked up from his glass of whiskey, his eyes sharp despite the late hour. "Another ghost?" he asked bitterly. "Not this time," James replied. "I pulled the hotel staff records from the gala. At first, nothing stood out. But then I reviewed the security footage again. It wasn't a guest who brought you that glass of water, it was a maid." Victor straightened slowly, his heartbeat quickening. He opened the folder. Inside was a grainy still from the footage, a woman in a plain black uniform, her face turned just enough to reveal her profile. It was unmistakable. Her. Rosa. For a moment, disbelief rooted him in place. He had searched Paris, London, Dubai, spent 35 million chasing whispers, and yet the woman he longed for was already in his life. She had been there every day, silent and unseen, walking past him in the very halls of his own home. "How long?" Victor asked hoarsely. "Years," James said. "She's been employed here as a maid since before the gala. Her name is Rosa Alvarez." The name struck Victor like a bell. Rosa. Simple, unadorned, real. He stared at the photograph again, shame rising hot in his chest. Every day, she had crossed his path with lowered eyes, carrying out tasks he never acknowledged. And he, so consumed by pride, so certain she belonged to some hidden world of wealth, had ignored her completely. Memories returned with sharp clarity, Rosa dusting his study, setting meals before him, retreating into silence when he entered a room. She had always been there. Always. Yet he had never once paused to truly look at her. Victor pushed back from the desk and rose to his feet, pacing the length of the office. A storm of emotions churned inside him, astonishment, guilt, awe. How could a man who prided himself on seeing everything have been so blind? He thought of the gala again, the way her kindness had reached him in that moment of weariness. He remembered the water she had offered, the sincerity in her voice. He had built an empire by calculating motives, by recognizing ambition in every handshake and smile. But Rosa's act had carried no agenda. It was genuine, effortless, untainted by wealth or expectation. And he had overlooked her every single day since. James watched silently as Victor struggled with the revelation. At last, Victor stopped pacing, his voice low. All this time, she was right here. He moved to the window, staring out at the glittering city below. The skyline stretched endlessly, a reminder of the world he commanded. Yet what humbled him most was not the vastness of his empire but the quiet presence of a woman who had asked him a simple question, "Are you all right?" Victor's grip tightened on the windowsill. Shame pressed heavily against his chest. He had spent a fortune chasing shadows, convinced that only someone extraordinary, an heiress, a hidden jewel of society, could carry the purity he had felt that night. Instead, the truth was simple, almost painfully so. It was Rosa, the maid he ignored. The woman he longed for was the very soul he had failed to see. And for the first time in years, Victor Hale, the billionaire, the king, the man who thought he had everything, felt small. Chapter 7, A Billionaire's Humbling. Victor Hale had faced rivals who tried to ruin him, markets that threatened to crush him, and empires that rose only to collapse under his hand. Yet nothing had shaken him as deeply as the quiet revelation of Rosa Alvarez. He spent the following days in silence, carrying the knowledge like a stone in his chest. Every time he crossed the marble hallways of his mansion, he became acutely aware of her presence, the soft rustle of her uniform, the steady rhythm of her work, the way she lowered her gaze when he entered a room. Once, these details had blurred into the background of his life. Now they consumed him. He noticed her hands, steady and precise as she arranged flowers in a vase. He noticed the way she hummed under her breath when she thought no one was near, a tune so gentle it seemed to soothe the air around her. He noticed her weariness at the end of long shifts, the quiet determination in her posture, and the humility that cloaked her like a second skin. And with each observation, shame deepened. How many times had he walked past her without acknowledgement? How many mornings had she laid out his breakfast, only for him to consume it without a word? She had been faithful, diligent, constant, yet invisible to him, because he had never cared to see. Now he could not stop seeing her. At night, Victor lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind haunted by questions. What did she think of him? Did she remember that moment at the gala? Did she realize how deeply it had marked him? Or was he just another shadow in her life, as unremarkable to her as she had once been to him? For the first time, Victor doubted his worth. Not his wealth. He knew the power of his money, the reach of his influence, but his worth as a man. Rosa had offered him something no one else had, sincerity. And he had overlooked her. He wondered if that blindness had cost him the very thing he craved most. He tried to speak to her once. It was late evening, and Rosa was dusting the shelves in his study. Victor lingered by the doorway, watching her. The words formed in his throat, simple words, human words, "Thank you. I see you. I remember." But when she turned, her eyes lowered instinctively, and the weight of his own pride silenced him. He muttered a clipped order about the desk instead, then hated himself for it. In the solitude of his office, Victor paced restlessly. $35 million had been spent chasing a ghost, and all along, the answer had been a woman folding linens in the next room. He, the man who claimed mastery over details, had failed at the simplest task, seeing the people who kept his life in motion. The empire he built felt hollow now. Towers of glass and steel, accounts overflowing with numbers, accolades pinned to his name, they all seemed meaningless compared to the dignity of the woman he had ignored. Victor's pride cracked. For decades, he had worn arrogance like armor, shielding himself from vulnerability. But standing in his own home, realizing the depth of his blindness, he felt something he had never allowed himself before: humility. He understood, at last, that Rosa's worth had nothing to do with status or wealth. She was valuable not because she was rare, not because she belonged to some elite circle, but because she was genuine. Her kindness had been pure, uncalculated, free of the poison that so often tainted his world. And in that understanding, Victor Hale, billionaire, mogul, master of industries, felt himself undone. He knew he had to change. Not to win Rosa, not to claim her as though she were another acquisition, but to become a man worthy of the kindness she had once offered so freely. The thought terrified him. For the first time, money could not protect him. Influence could not command respect here. The only currency was humility, and it was one he had never learned to spend. As Rosa passed his study that night, carrying a tray with quiet grace, Victor lifted his eyes and truly saw her, not the maid, not the servant, but the woman who had become the mirror of his failings and the key to his redemption. And in that silent acknowledgement, a new chapter of his life began, not as a king upon a throne, but as a man humbled by the treasure he had ignored. Chapter 8, A New Vision. The morning light streamed through the mansion's tall windows, casting soft gold across the marble floors. For years, Victor Hale had walked these same halls with the certainty of a man who believed the world belonged to him. But now, each step felt different, lighter, uncertain, and strangely hopeful. He had made a decision. It was not the kind of decision he was used to: no acquisition, no contract, no power play. This was personal, vulnerable, uncharted territory for a man who had hidden behind walls of wealth his entire life. Victor found Rosa in the library that morning, carefully aligning books along the shelves. She turned as he entered, startled to see him there at such an hour. As always, her eyes lowered, ready to retreat into the safety of silence. But this time, he spoke her name. Rosa. The sound of it startled even him. He had never said it aloud before. She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his, uncertain and cautious. "I owe you something," Victor said quietly, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "An apology." She frowned, confused. "Sir. For years, you've worked in this house, and I barely saw you. I thought myself a man who noticed everything, but I was blind. At the gala, it was you. You asked me if I was all right. You gave me water when I didn't even know I needed it. And I've spent months, searching for the woman who showed me that kindness, never realizing she was here all along." Rosa's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face. She said nothing, but her silence was not dismissal, it was waiting. Victor stepped closer, his gaze steady, though his heart pounded with a fear he had never felt in boardrooms or battlefields. "I spent $35 million looking for you. I searched across the world, convinced you must be someone extraordinary. And I was right, you are. Not because of wealth or status, but because you were the only one who ever looked at me as a man, not as a fortune." For a long moment, the room was still. Rosa held his eyes, searching for arrogance, for mockery, for the cruelty she feared might lie beneath his words. But she found none. Only sincerity, raw and unpolished. At last, she spoke. "Why tell me this, Mr. Hale?" "Because I don't want to be the man who overlooks you anymore," he said softly. "I don't want to live surrounded by treasures I can buy and miss the treasure I cannot. Her eyes glistened, though she blinked the tears away quickly. Rosa was not a woman who cried easily, life had taught her resilience. Yet hearing her name on his lips, hearing the truth of his search, cracked something open inside her. "I'm just a maid," she whispered. "No," Victor said firmly, shaking his head. "You are the woman who changed me." Silence settled again, but this time it was different, warm, almost fragile. Victor did not press further. For the first time, he understood that patience, not power, would decide what happened next. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion grew less cold. Victor began greeting his staff by name, pausing to acknowledge the people who had long kept his empire running in the background. He no longer rushed past Rosa, instead, he listened when she spoke, small conversations blooming between them. Slowly, the walls he had built around himself began to fall, replaced by something he had never known before, humility, and with it, peace. One evening, Victor found himself on the balcony, watching the city glow beneath the twilight sky. Rosa stepped out beside him, no longer startled by his presence. They stood in silence, two figures bound not by wealth or power, but by the rare and simple truth of recognition. For the first time in his life, Victor Hale saw clearly. Not the skyline. Not the empire. Not the endless pursuit of more. He saw Rosa. And in seeing her, he finally saw himself.